Hey there, Econ friends. Welcome back. We're going to continue our discussion with the really important, a simple but an important concept in economics known as the invisible hand. In economic theory, in competitive market theory, the invisible hand is this notion that there are underlying forces that move markets from inefficient places to efficient places. You can see this in lots and lots of ways, and we'll do a few examples at the end. One thing that I want you to be doing as you're going through these lectures is out in the real world to be looking for ways that the invisible hand, and especially the price system, how that moves resources around and how that nudges us from less efficient to more efficient outcomes. So the invisible hand, a really important idea. Let's define it. There's a lot of ways to define it, but broadly speaking, what we believe in economics and in market economics, and specifically in competitive market economics, is that market prices, which we know are determined by the supply and demand forces. In other words, supply and demand curves lead to equilibrium, and equilibrium generates the equilibrium price. So again, we believe that market prices, as determined by competitive supply and demand forces, will direct independent and specifically self-interested people to engage in activities that promote the economic well-being of the whole society and often result in the most efficient possible allocation of resources. This is really important. It's a really weird thing to think about. So let's say it one more time. We believe that in a market, the price function, which comes from the supply and demand functions and those curves, that the price function of the invisible hand will basically guide independent, self-interested, even we might say selfish or greedy people to engage in activities, but that those activities, on top of being self-interested, will also promote the entire economic well-being of society. And in a sense, that this invisible hand will align personal motives with social goods. That the market system will align personal self-interest with society's general interest. And again, that the actions of independent people will lead not just to well-being, but critically to the most efficient allocation of resources. In other words, we believe that markets that are, again, competitive and that protect property rights will tend to bring the self-interest of individual people, buyers and sellers, into alignment with the betterment of society. And that's a really, really deep thing when you really think about it. The idea that individuals pursuing their own self-interested goals, their own utility motives or profit motives, that those individual personal pursuits are not contrary to what society wants, but actually can generate what society wants. That there is this alignment between the self-interest of individuals and societal interest of all of us is a really powerful notion. And that's what the invisible hand is. The invisible hand is guided by market prices. And market prices are a critical feature of this system because the market prices reflect the goals, the decisions, and the incentives of millions and millions of buyers and sellers. In other words, you can see a market as a venue, as a mechanism, as a device that allows millions of buyers and millions of sellers to come together. And in pursuing their own actions, their own self-interested actions, pursuing utility or pursuing profit, they actually generate outcomes that are not just good for them individually, but are great and optimal and efficient for society overall. Okay, Market prices, again, very critical. Market prices perform several key functions in our society. What do market prices do? Well, we would say market prices, they communicate information. The movement of prices up or down as equilibrium adjusts to changing supply and demand conditions, these market prices, they convey information. Prices are like a shorthand because they embody and they wrap up all the underlying incentives and forces. So prices are a shortcut and they convey information. Market prices also, number two, they coordinate the actions of market participants. They coordinate the actions of all those buyers and sellers who participate in the market. And we got a little taste of this when we learned the law of supply and law of demand, the idea that high prices or low prices send distinct signals. It's the price mechanism that generates the activity that ultimately leads to the adjustment that brings participants together. Number three, market prices motivate economic players. We learned before that people respond to incentives. Prices are a critical, crucial economic incentive. So we know that prices motivate people. The law of demand says that if prices go up, we're going to buy a little bit less. It's a strong incentive. We know that firms are motivated by profit and the idea of prices that they can sell their goods for, as well as the prices for their raw materials, that talks about their profits. So prices are definitely an incentive. Number four, market prices, they ration scarce goods. Specifically, market prices ration scarce goods among potential users, and they ensure that the scarce goods go to the people who value them the most. They ration scarce goods, ensuring that they go to those who value them the most. Now, this one isn't always a pleasant one. People who are homeless, they are effectively priced out of the market for housing. People who are starving are priced out of the market for food. So clearly there's areas where this idea of prices being a rationing mechanism fail because a part of society doesn't eat or doesn't have shelter. But it's also important to remember that economics as a science is not equipped for those moral questions. Economics as a science, market economics specifically, are about the efficient use of resources. And a part of that is that we have to ration scarce goods. We know that we need a mechanism for rationing. Prices serve that function. Now, some people would say, well, prices fail because they don't allow people to get those scarce goods if they need them. But the real question is not, do prices fail? The real question would be, if prices weren't around, could there be any other rationing mechanism that would do a better job? And more than likely, the answer is going to be no, because while they are amoral, prices are effective. So we know that prices communicate information, they coordinate actions, they incentivize and motivate buyers and sellers, they ration scarce goods among potential users, ideally ensuring that the people who value the goods the most get them. And finally, market prices serve an allocative function. Market prices serve an allocative function. And by that we mean that market prices move productive resources. That's the land, labor, and capital. That market prices move productive resources away from less productive uses and toward more productive uses. Land, labor, and capital can be combined in lots of different ways. Some of those ways would be more efficient than others. Market prices when the system is working, they guarantee that those land, labor, and capital resources are moved from sectors of the economy where they're less efficient and less productive into sectors where they're more efficient and more productive. And that is a great benefit to society. Now, again, the efficiency of market organization is dependent on several things. Number one, all these ideas that we're talking about imply that we're talking competitive markets. And in addition, we believe that market efficiency requires free entry into the market. By free entry into the market, we mean can up-and-coming entrepreneurs and can rival competitive businesses easily jump into a market. Another way of saying free entry is to say that effective markets have to have low barriers to entry. In other words, a market works best when new up-and-coming firms can easily, quickly, seamlessly, and at very low cost enter a market. And that's what reinforces the competition. So we know that market efficiency is dependent on competitive markets, which implies free entry into the market, aka low barriers to entry. And critically, competitive markets require that we have both the presence and enforcement of property rights. When those three things are present, markets tend to do a very good job at generating efficiency. Now, again, it's important to note that efficiency is not the only goal. There are other. Fairness can be a goal. There's other potential societal goals. So efficiency is not the only goal, but we would argue in economics that efficiency should be the first or primary goal. Because if a system is efficient, it's going to generate more wealth, and that can then be used to help flesh out and meet your other societal goals. So that, my friends, is a brief overview of the idea of the invisible hand and the role of prices and how it comes together with efficiency and competitive markets. Real quick, a couple of things for you to think about. An example, what would happen in a city if there were, shall we say, too many gym trainers and at the same time, too few hairstylists? So we've got a society where a bunch of jamokes are walking around with their trainer shirts telling you to lift weights. There's just too many of them. But at the same time, there aren't enough people to make your hair look good. How would a competitive system, a market-based system, rectify that? And then let's do another example, a little bit more iffy, a little bit more dangerous to think about. Suppose that a hurricane hits Florida and causes significant damage. In a competitive market, what's going to happen to the market price of basic supplies? Is this a bad thing? A lot of people may not like what happens to the price, but the real question is this a bad thing? What incentives do market prices provide? And what would happen if the government, after this massive hurricane, were to pass some laws prohibiting price gouging? In other words, if the government were to say, hey, it's not fair that after this hurricane, all of you greedy businesses jack up your prices. What would happen in that situation? Take a minute and pause, try to figure these out, and then when you start it back up, I'll go through some solutions with you. So up here, suppose that we have a city with too many gym trainers, right? Just too many. Well, let's do a little supply and demand analysis. So suppose that we have a market for gym trainers. We have P, 0, and Q. And let's suppose that we have an initial equilibrium where the supply and demand for gym trainers is at equilibrium. And suppose that these meatheads can make $15 an hour, okay? And we're going to have an equilibrium quantity as well. Well, suppose that for whatever reason, society's tastes and preferences change and people don't want to be yelled at by some jabroni in a black shirt that says trainer on it. So people say, you know what, I'm going to lift on my own. I'm just going to do something by myself. I can read a book or read a website, train myself. And people don't want as many gym trainers. In other words, we started off at equilibrium, but now with people's preferences changing, there's too many. Well, when people's preferences changed, the demand for gym trainers fell. And when the demand for gym trainers fell, the equilibrium price that gym trainers could pull in per hour also fell. For example, from $15 down to $12. Notice what's going on here. People want less gym trainers, so now there's too many. Well, when that happens, the competitive market quickly reacts. Demand falls, and the prices, in this case, the wage that trainers can earn, also falls. And this means that some gym trainers who before were profitable and doing well are now going to suffer losses. Now, for these individual gym trainers, these losses are not pleasant by any stretch. But look at the bigger picture of society as a whole and efficiency. Because the price went down in reaction to a change in people's preferences, some of these gym trainers, especially the more inefficient ones who can't adapt and can't serve their customers well, they're going to face losses. And eventually, they're going to either be forced to exit the industry or go bankrupt. Either way, society will react, the market will react, and the number of gym trainers that are operating will fall. Again, for the individual gym trainer who has to leave or go bankrupt, this isn't pleasant. But look at efficiency from the broad societal view. Society determined that there's too many, and the market reacted predictably to get us to the right amount. Let's do this again, but let's go the other way. Let's suppose that now we're talking about a situation where there are too few hairstylists. So let's go back and let's do a simple model. Market model. This is for stylists, because you got to look good. We have the PE, the 0, and the Q. And we have a simple market with the demand for hairstylists and a supply of hairstylists. And we would say that at equilibrium, the average hairstylist maybe makes $10 per hour. But now let's say that for whatever reason, people really want to look good. They are drawn to find a very an attractive, nice place to get their hair cut. And there's not enough of those. People say, we really want this, but they're not around. There's too few hairstylists. What's going to happen? Well, if there's too few hairstylists, that implies that there's an increased demand. This is going to push the demand curve for hairstylists out to the right. And predictably, at the new equilibrium, the equilibrium price, the wage that hairstylists can pull, would rise from $10, let's say, to $18. And now look at what this new higher wage is going to do. This new higher wage is going to be an incentive. And lots of people who would not have thought about entering this industry, or people who live in other geographic areas, are going to enter the industry or move to our area. There is going to be an entry. And notice that when this process finishes up, the entry of these new hairstylists will solve the initial problem that there weren't enough. Again, notice that society sensed the problem, and the self-interested mechanics of a competitive market, by the change in demand, increasing the wage, which led to an incentive, which brought people in. You started off here, and now society has gotten more hairstylists. The problem of too few has been solved, and not through government intervention, and not through a centralized planning board, but instead through the mechanics of a well-functioning competitive market. Finally, let's look at this one. Suppose that there were a hurricane in Florida, Well, we're going to have a market for building supplies. And those supplies can be both the actual supplies as well as the contractors, the construction workers who are well skilled in doing repair work. We're going to have a P, a 0, and a Q, and we're going to have an initial equilibrium. And let's say that the price for all these hard workers is 20 bucks an hour. Well, after the hurricane, people want to repair. People need to get things fixed. This is going to cause an immediate increase in the demand for both construction supplies and construction workers. This increase in demand will lead to a new equilibrium, and this will push the price up from, let's say, $20 an hour or $20 for supplies to $30. Either way, much like our hairstylist case, notice that the event happens, society faces a sort of imbalance, buyers or sellers react and curves shift, and as a result, equilibrium prices change. If left alone, this increase in price from $20 to $30 would probably act as an incentive to get contractors from other states to come into Florida. They're going to say, hey, the prices in Florida are higher. We can make some more money there. Let's leave California. Let's leave Nevada. Let's temporarily go to Florida. They're going to make more money, but that's okay because this influx of contractors and this influx of suppliers will help the state recover. Of course, this can all go wrong if the government attempts to regulate prices. We know that the supply and demand shifts are going to lead to an increase in the price of supplies. Again, is this going to make any individual buyer happy? No, of course not. As buyers, we always prefer low prices to higher prices. But from the point of view of society as a whole, Florida will quickly recover and be rebuilt because this increase in price will act as an incentive to bring more supplies to the state, to bring more contractors to the state, to get existing Florida suppliers to work more, to get more supplies that are needed into the market. But predictably, if the government were to get involved and say, for example, that they're going to pass a law that prohibits what they're going to call price gouging. Notice that when prices go up and people like it, it's okay because the prices went up. But when prices go up and people don't like it, they give it the term price gouging. Well, politicians will probably react to this, and maybe they'll pass some laws prohibiting price gouging. This may sound like it's a great thing on the surface, but let's think back to the incentives. At the original price of $20 and at the original equilibrium quantity, there were not enough supplies to meet Florida's needs post-hurricane. What if the government interjects in the economy? If the government regulates prices, in other words, if the government prevents the market system from naturally and organically raising the prices of these short and critical supplies, if the government prevents this, they're also blocking the incentive. And no new firms will come to Florida, and no Florida suppliers will want to work more because there's no financial incentive. And in fact, what Florida really needs, more supplies, more contractors, things to get fixed, won't happen. The state could theoretically be stuck in this damaged condition because politicians blocked the incentive. And for this reason, in economic theory, we believe that anytime the government seeks to interject itself in the economy to control prices, we have to be very critical. That's going to be the focus of our next lecture on price controls and black markets. See you soon.